Look who I have hoodwinked into returning to Here's What We Know. Psychic lawyer Mark Anthony. Who doesn't, as I said on your first appearance, want to talk to a psychic lawyer? Let me tell you, somebody sent me a comment, right? Saying the Mark Anthony episode was the one I didn't know I needed.
Well, that's nice to hear. I think
she said I was transfixed. I'm like, okay, I'll listen to this. And she goes 10 minutes into it. I'm like, oh my gosh, I love this. So,
well, thank you. And, I want to thank you. I want to thank the listener and all your listeners. And it's an honor to be back on your show, Gary. We really had a great discussion last time, and I'm looking forward to today's topic. It was just so much fun
because I got to learn a lot about you because I wanted to see how you got there. And in case I encourage you to go back and listen to the other episode. Now we've added video now, Mark, so now they can see us. You know.
I know. And everything's going towards live stream. And I think that's really great. When we were kids, the idea of a video telephone was science fiction, or sort of, it wasn't really science fiction. It was like only something that super wealthy people had. And now everybody whips out your cell phone and voila, we're talking to people and seeing them in real time.
The cell phone, the people who created the cell phone literally were just trying to recreate Star Trek. That was their impetus.
Oh, yeah. Remember the flip phones? Now, if that isn't a communicator from the original Trek series, I remember the flip phones. And now if you look at it, we basically, the cell phone is a tricorder because it's a computer, a recorder, a sensor, a camera, a communication device. It's fascinating the times that we live in. We have all this miraculous technology that, let's say 100 years ago, if you try to explain a cell phone to somebody, they'd think you're crazy. I mean, I think it was in 1926, Nicola Tesla. And Tesla, he's one of those people that comes up on a lot of shows like this. And he said that with advances in, he's called it telephony and television, he said that at one point, the whole world will be a global mind, and there will be a device small enough to fit in a man's breast pocket that will enable him to see and hear somebody as he's talking to them. And so it took a genius on the level of Nikola Tesla to envision something like that. So, and here we are.
Truly remarkable when you go through it, and especially with what you do. And we're going to talk about what you do because, again, that's why we're here. It's fascinating. But when you add technology into the mix, right? I mean, because what you do was so personal up until then. Right? That it was just one-on-one persons. Now, like I've seen your TV appearances. I've seen you when you're doing readings in the audience and stuff like that. And you add in the technology. And to go to your background, like I said in the first episode, find out what Mark's father did for a living. Worked at NASA. And your mother was an artist, and your mother was the impetus behind you sharing this gift.
Yeah, she was very, very gifted. And, we were a family of faith. My father's family, they were very devout Baptists. My mother's family was devout Catholics. And no matter how many times I say that, people always say, you're Jewish, right? And it's like, I realize my name is Mark. I'm a lawyer and I have brown curly hair, but I don't have the privilege of being Jewish because I'm of Italian and English descent. I mean, it's I'm trust me, I'm not going all Kanye. That was just a lighthearted joke. And the thing is, my family always had a deep faith in God, but my father always impressed upon me that there is an explanation for everything, even the spiritual, and that explanation will be found in quantum physics. And that's one of the reasons that I always admired Nikola Tesla, because he was the living embodiment of that. I mean, think about it. I mean, he envisioned a cell phone 100 years ago. And then if you look at somebody like Leonardo da Vinci, who was drawing diagrams of helicopters 500 years before we had the ability to construct such a device. So there's no limit to what the human mind and the inspiration of the human spirit can conceive and ultimately achieve. And once again, it's not hocus pocus or magic. It's based on science. And that's the nature of the work that I do. And since we're on camera, my latest book, The Afterlife Frequency, explains the scientific basis of spirit contact in all its different forms, because everything that I do as a medium is about tuning into frequency. And I explain how this works based on human physiology and how it relates to physics. So it's been quite an amazing journey throughout my life understanding these things, and I welcome the opportunity to be on your show.
I find it fascinating. I mean, what is it? I just read this. I read this statistic the other day that, it was almost like I want to say it's almost 50%, either a little over or a little under. People said they've seen a ghost. Now, I have never seen an apparition. But I can be completely honest with you and say I have felt a presence. And it's usually, I can remember playing golf one day, and I'm out playing by myself, and my brother and I used to play golf, and I hit this great shot. And as I hit this great shot, I felt him right there with me. I'm like, and I literally said, "How about that one, huh?" Because I didn't expect a reply, but I felt it, that he was right there going, that's pretty good. And that where do you fall in that? Because I know with this experience, and I want to talk about the afterlife experience because I am fascinated by that and the science that goes with it. But have you ever seen a ghost? Have you literally ever seen an apparition?
Well, kind of like every day. See, people confuse the term ghost and spirit. And a lot of people that encounter spirits, they get afraid. So ghost tends to have a negative connotation, but there's three different schools of thought on what a haunting is. The first one is that it is a spirit who's trapped here in this world. And I don't subscribe to that for a second, because as I explain in my books, The Evidence of Eternity and in greater depth in The Afterlife Frequency, I refer to spirits as the electromagnetic soul, because our brain did not create our soul. It merely houses it, just the way your computer hard drive houses the programs that's on it. And we know that the brain has an EM, electromagnetic field, and that we know from faith that the soul pre-exists the body, comes into the body, moves on after the body dies. So I developed the term the electromagnetic soul to describe what we really are, which is pure consciousness, a soul, a spirit, that is eternal electromagnetic energy. In other words, neither created nor destroyed, only transferred from one form to another. So the soul being trapped here and not knowing they're dead, I know that some of my colleagues will disagree with me, but in my opinion, they are mired in Victorian era thinking about this. The second school of thought is that spirits are not anchored to a particular location, but that they will pop from they will adjust their frequency from the other side dimension to our world. In other words, they'll visit a particular location or a particular person. I think that's much more tenable. The third school of thought in a haunting is that it's not a spirit at all, but residual energy echo. In other words, let's say there's a place where a brutal murder occurred, and it seems that haunted houses, tend to be where there have been maybe a suicide or some type of tragic death or a homicide. And that's because matter retains vibration. And so if something of a brutal nature happens somewhere, the vibration of that it is absorbed by the material, the physical substances, the walls, the house itself. And so that when you encounter that residual energy echo, Gary, that is no more a sentient spirit, then your reflection in a mirror is you. It literally is a reflection. And so for people that do house clearings and try to get those spirits out of there, this residual energy echo keeps going and going and going, but it can be deflected off. So with the house clearings, people can deflect that. And that's been my experience with this, because as soon as you die, you immediately revert to a purely energetic state, and you become part of the collective consciousness. In other words, your soul is like a drop of water. And when we leave our body, that drop of water plunges into the sea that I call the collective consciousness. So as soon as you're out of your body, you know that you're a spirit. And so you're not going to hang out at some decrepit old building. I mean, look at it like this. Are you going to hang out at a garbage dump if you can go be at a beachfront resort in Maui? I mean, come on.
Now, I can only afford the garbage dump. So if there's a mortgage in heaven, then maybe that's where I end up. Well, see, that's where I think where a lot of people are confused, because I study you. I sit back and try to look at it. And one of the words that I hear you use is frequency, right? You just said that. And so when I see you do readings and stuff, and it's almost like you're trying to describe a painting from memory. You know what I mean? So you're not looking at it,
right,
but you're visualizing it. So when I ask it, if you've seen an apparition, that's what I mean is like, it's like the Sixth Sense. Do you see Bruce Willis standing there? What's the experience like for you?
Right. Okay. Well, let me explain. Okay, the sixth sense, if you will, is, all right, we have 5 physical senses: sight, hearing, taste, smell, and touch. The sixth sense is the ability to perceive beyond the seen world. That's essentially what the word psychic means. It's from a Greek word, psyche, which means, beyond normal perception, beyond this world. And the French developed terms for the different aspects of the sixth sense. If you hear a message from a spirit, that's clairaudience, which means clear seeing. If you feel a sensation, that's clairsentience. And within clairsentience, you have clairscent, which is smelling, clairgustance, which is tasting. Then there's clairsavance. That's where you just know something. They'll transmit, they meaning spirits, the collective consciousness, will transmit data to you. And then there's clairvoyance. Clairvoyance is clear seeing. And there's 2 types of clairvoyance: subjective and objective. Now, most of the time when I'm doing readings, I'm engaging in subjective clairvoyance, because a spirit, an electromagnetic soul or group of electromagnetic souls, is emitting a wave of electromagnetic energy frequency into my brain. The EM field of my brain then interfaces with that impulse and converts it into recognizable concepts based on my memories, feelings, and cultural associations. So let's say, your Aunt Gertrude comes through and starts transmitting to me a visual. Maybe she was like real thin and she had a big freckle on her face or something like that. So they will transmit that to me, and I will see an image of that person in my mind's eye. So it's a lot like recollection of a vivid memory. For example, if I say to everybody here, think of the painting, the Mona Lisa. All right, we've all seen the most famous painting in the world, and we're all seeing the Mona Lisa in our mind's eye now, with varying degrees of clarity and color. Exactly. Objective clairvoyance is what you're describing, seeing a ghost or seeing a spirit, which is external to my body. And the reason that this is called objective clairvoyance is because more than one person can see it. In other words, it's objectively verified. And I have seen that on a number of occasions. Now, the question is, well, why don't spirits just do objective clairvoyance every time they talk to you? It takes a lot of energy. And the thing is, the spirits are more interested in transmitting data to me than, "Ooh, here I am," and it takes a lot of energy for me to perceive that. So sometimes I will actually see them um, um, outside of my mind's eye, but usually I'd say about 90, 95, 96% of the time, I'll see them in within my mind. And it's really cool when I'm working with other mediums, when more than one person, we do get the objective clairvoyance. Also, in a phenomenon known as shared death experiences. So somebody is in the process of actively dying. Let's say you have a loved one who's in hospice care, and he or she is in the transition of passing, in the process of transitioning to passing to the other side. And this is reported a lot throughout history, more so in more recent years because it's kind of come out of the fringe element. But family members, close friends, hospice workers, other healthcare workers will start seeing spirits associated with the dying person, and these spirits are coming to greet them. And I've been at a number of bedsides where I'm seeing this, and people who are not mediums are also seeing this. I explain this in great detail, how and why this happens, in my book, The Afterlife Frequency. But it all has to do with the overlap of the frequency of the spirits that are coming to greet the person who's dying, the electromagnetic frequency of the dying person's soul leaving their body, and then those frequencies overlap the brain waves of the people in close proximity. It's just like radio frequency interference. Let's say you're trying to listen to one station, all of a sudden another one overlaps. You could have, and you hear 2 or 3 different stations. I think everybody that's ever used a radio has encountered that, and it's the same thing in spirit communication. And deathbed visions are really fascinating because when somebody is in the process of actively dying, they may start talking to and about people that they know who died. In years past, the mainstream thought in the medical profession is that this was some type of grief-induced hallucination or function of the dying brain. But now that people in close proximity to the dying person report seeing these same spirits, that takes it out of the realm of being the subjective into the realm of objective. I got to share one story with you. New Year's Eve of 2021. Okay, it's about to become 2022, and Betty White, famous actress Betty White, one of the Golden Girls. I mean, Betty White. Everybody, over the age of 2 knows who Betty White is, and it's really a shame because she died, I think, about 2 weeks shy of her 100th birthday. Well, Betty White was in television from the time television was invented. And in the 1960s, she met a game show host and was on his show, Alan Ludden. And Alan Ludden and Betty White fell madly in love, and they were married until, I think in the 1960s, up until he died around, I think it was 1983. And Betty White never remarried. She always called Alan the love of her life. And in her last moments, as she lay dying, in her last moments of life in this world, and this was attested to by her healthcare provider and actress Vicki Lawrence, who was on Carol Burnett's show in Mama's Family, because Vicki Lawrence was Betty's one of her best friends. Yeah, both of them said at the very last few seconds, exactly. Last few seconds of Betty White's life, she opened her eyes, looked up, and said, "Alan." And it wasn't just blurting his name. They said it looked like the look on her face, she saw Alan. And there are so many examples of that, but that may be one of the more famous examples. The most heavily documented example of a deathbed vision, and I'm not getting political here, George Floyd. when the officer was on his neck, people were filming this all over, and the last thing that he said is, "Mama, I'm through." And I remember seeing that in the news, and being a near-death experience researcher and afterlife researcher, I started doing a background study on him, and he was extremely close to his mother, whom he always called Mama, who had died a few years before. And the last thing that he said, and the look on his face, "Mama, I'm through." Does that mean I'm through with this world, or I'm coming through to you? And I just put that out there because I believe that may be the most heavily documented deathbed vision
That's
in history.
A heck of a point. That's kind of surreal. I don't know if I shared this with you on the last time. I probably did, and if I did, it's too good of a story not to repeat. But my brother, who passed back in '96, I called him about a week and a half, 2 weeks before he died, and he was already very ill. And I called him and I said, "How are you doing, buddy?" And he goes, "Fine." I said, "What are you doing?" He goes, "I'm sitting here with mom and dad." And our mother had passed about 4 or 5 months before, and our father had passed many, many years before. And I'm like, "Really?" And he goes, "Yeah." I said, "Where are they?" And he goes, "Well, mama's here on the bed with me, and dad's sitting over in a chair across the room."
Wow.
And you have to understand that my father was a bit of a train wreck. And to say he was estranged from the family is an understatement. And I thought, isn't it interesting? Because I'm like, I can't believe you're not telling me what you see, and who's to say if it's the medication or the disease? But the fact that you would place them, mom there beside you and dad across the room, right? And I just told him, I said, "Well, tell him I said hi." And he goes, "I will." And that was, that was the story,
Wow.
And so I've always taken that with me. I always remembered that I always felt like, yeah, okay, they're there. And again, it was a week to 10 days before he joined them, and you're right, getting him ready.
Wow.
And I've always thought that they were getting him ready, going, all right, this is what you're here to do is done.
Right. And they know what's going on. They know when your EMS, your electromagnetic soul, is beginning to separate from the body. And so, because even in near death experiences, or rather, I don't want to say even in near death experiences, corroborate this, because the vast majority of NDEs, when somebody physically dies and they separate from their body, there's different stages. Sometimes they'll be floating above their body and see the people around it and hear what they're saying. They may go down a hallway in a hospital and listen and hear what their parents or whoever's saying. But then they can go to the next step, which is the sense of going through a tunnel into the light. And when they reach the end of the tunnel, they will encounter people that they know who are dead, or encounter people who are dead that they didn't know were dead. And then the stage beyond that is encountering what can only be described as the divine, as God. And one of the most interesting accounts that I use in my lectures is there was this young woman in Japan, and she was in the hospital, and she died during surgery, and she was resuscitated, and her parents were there in the recovery room. And when she came out of the anesthesia, she said, "I left my body and I went into the light," and the doctors were recording this. And she said, "But I saw my sister, and that cannot be, for she is alive." And her parents started to weep, and they said, "You didn't know this, but your sister was killed in a car accident last night." Okay, this woman did not know that her sister had died, yet she saw her when she went into the light. And so when skeptics is what I mean by people, start negating and trying to tear apart near-death experiences. How do you explain that one? Oh, it's a side effect of a dying brain. But if the information that the NDE is relating was never in the brain to begin with, then how do you account for that?
Near-death experiences. We're going to go down this road right after we take a quick break. More with the psychic lawyer and explorer, Mark Anthony, right here on Here's What We Know. It's time to think differently when it comes to your parties, meetings, and groups. The catering from Havana Cuba restaurant in downtown San Jose. Instead of the same old, how about the most delicious Cuban sandwich you've ever had? You're tired of fries? Plantains, my friends, they'll change your world. And here's something you didn't know. Havana Cuba was voted one of the top 10 tamales in the entire South Bay. They have vegan, vegetarian, and gluten-free options, and their website is 998cuba.com. They're located at 387 South 1st Street in downtown San Jose. It's Havana Cuba. So when it comes to near-death experiences, this is something I'm fascinated by this. You want to talk about going down a YouTube rabbit hole? I will go down the YouTube rabbit hole, sitting back watching people's near-death experiences. And I freely admit, I am a man of faith. I am a very fervent Christian. And I remember my mother got struck by lightning once, right? And she was on a telephone, and it knocked her across the room under a table. And she always tells the story, I was floating above my body. I could see you all. I could see everything that was going on. And I was thinking, this is cool because I don't hurt. I feel great. And she goes, and I heard the voice of Jesus. And she was very clear that it was Jesus going, Ruth, not now. Go home. Right?
Yeah.
Not now, go home.
Yeah.
And she was always, and I've never had a near-death experience. Thank you, Lord. But you have, haven't you?
I have, and it's fascinating when, and first off, thank you for explaining that you're a man of deep faith and Christian faith, because as a near-death experiencer and a near-death experience researcher, I've heard people say, well, that's against God. And it's like, well, then perhaps you should read the Bible, because there appears to be several accounts of NDEs. One of the most famous is the Apostle Paul in the first book of Corinthians, where he writes, I know a man who was caught up in the third heaven. And it's a lengthier passage, but throughout the Bible, there are three different levels of heaven. In Genesis, it's described that the first level of heaven is the sky. Then the second level of heaven is the realm of the stars. And the third heaven is the realm of God. And so Paul's explaining that there was a man who went to the third heaven and returned. In a lecture that I gave earlier this year, I was explaining how the tale of Jonah and the whale may have been an account of a near-death experience. And okay, so I'm paraphrasing scripture here, but Jonah was a prophet, and he was supposed to go. God told him to go to Nineveh, and Nineveh is in modern-day Iraq. And Jonah didn't want to go, so he hopped on a ship and he was headed to Spain. Okay, because I guess southern Spain was as nice then as it is now, and I guess Iraq then was the way it is now. And all of a sudden, the Lord sent this big storm, and Jonah said that this is all my fault. I disobeyed God. So the crew promptly threw him overboard, and the sea calmed. And then the Lord sent a great fish, which is debatable. Fish could be interpreted as a fish, a whale, or a leviathan, which is basically a sea monster, which swallowed Jonah in his belly for 3 days and 3 nights. If you read what Jonah recalls in the book of Jonah, he talks about descending to the roots of the earth and then ascending basically to God. And this is where biblical scholars and NDE researchers, including myself, believe this is similar to the account of Paul in the New Testament about he died, he descended, and then ascended, and then the whale spit him out. And then, of course, Jonah continued on his journey. So for our literalist friends, our friends who take a literal interpretation, the question is, what in the Mediterranean or in the ocean in general can swallow a human? Well, assuming it was a whale's esophagus is roughly 5 inches in diameter, so a whale couldn't do it. But in June of 2022, off Cape Cod, Michael Packard, a lobster diver, was diving for lobsters off Provincetown, Massachusetts, and suddenly he felt this tremendous shove and everything went black. And at first he thought he'd been hit by a great white shark, but then he realized he was in this dark, slimy, hot environment, and he couldn't. And 30 seconds later, he said, "I thought I was dead. I thought it was over." And he said, "All I could think about were my children." And 30 seconds later, the humpback whale spit him out. And he was rescued and brought on television, and actually was on the Jimmy Kimmel show and made world news, being hailed as the modern day Jonah. So if that happened to you in ancient times, you ended up in scripture. If it happens to you in the 21st century, you end up on the Jimmy Kimmel show. So for our literalist friends, it is conceivably possible that you can be engulfed, albeit temporarily, by a whale.
And it would seem like 3 days.
Let me tell you something. From his account and what I saw, that is not an experience that I'm even remotely interested in having. And what was probably going on there? Humpback whales feed on very small organisms, krill and all that. And probably where he was going for the lobster, the whale was going for something in close proximity, because the whale gets this thing in its mouth. Is like, what is this? This big, not very tasty thing, bouncing around. And humpback whales will generally, they're not going to attack humans in most circumstances. And certainly their species has every right to hate ours based on, how we've treated them. But the thing is, when you start examining scripture, another mysterious passage is Jacob's ladder. And Jacob's ladder is one of my favorites. And we all know the story of Jacob was, I think he was leaving from Beersheba, and he laid down and he used a stone as his pillow. And the next thing he knew, he was in this transcendent dream, and he saw this ladder, this stairway with angels running up and down, coming back and forth. In a way, it was sort of the original Stairway to Heaven, 3,000 plus years before Jimmy Page and Robert Plant, before Robert Plant wrote it. But what is really, really amazing are all the mystical interpretations. And Jacob's Ladder has been examined by Jewish scholars, Christian scholars, but also by Hindu and Buddhist and other scholars, because it could have several different meanings. One is that time has no time, and that is exemplified by the angels coming to earth and then returning to heaven in this unending procession, which could be referred to as the timelessness of time. Jewish scholars interpret this as the rise and fall of kingdoms on earth. Another interpretation is that it's the interconnectedness between heaven and earth. And the third one is that the angels going to and from heaven in an endless procession could be a reference to reincarnation, because the unending cycle of life, death, and rebirth. And when you start analogizing Jacob's Ladder and to near-death experiences, all NDEers come out of the experience saying that they feel that time has no time. Then they say that they feel that everything is interconnected, even inanimate objects. And third, they all say that reincarnation is the case. When you look at quantum physics on the subatomic level, starting with Albert Einstein's theory of relativity, coming up to today, their quantum physicists believe that time doesn't exist. It's something we've created because we are born, we grow old, and we die to measure things. Secondly, because everything on the most basic levels, energy, electromagnetic energy, we're all interconnected. And then, of course, energy being neither created nor destroyed, only transferred from one form to another, that would then lead into the probability of reincarnation as opposed to, eternal damnation or eternal, but Jacob's Ladder certainly is a fascinating passage and is under scrutiny and has been for thousands of years and by many different religions. So I say I love studying this stuff because I think it's so fascinating. And also when people say, "Oh, reincarnation, no, that's evil," and they got to stop it with the evil. All right, we're talking about God here. There's no limitations on energy, on eternity, and people that wrote the Bible thousands of years ago were trying to describe phenomena that they didn't understand, but that they were experiencing, and they were using the terminology of the day to explain it. And now that we have the benefit of quantum physics, and I'm not saying that our level of technology at this point in time is the be all and end all, we are able to now examine this through a different filter, and maybe it should not be passed off as myth. So I'm just presenting the argument, and people are free to make their own conclusions.
Can I ask, what was your near-death experience? Or is that something?
I write about it extensively in the Afterlife Frequency, but it happened when I was 4 years old. Yeah, it happened when I was 4, and it certainly has colored my perceptions of everything, I think, in a positive way. So, I encourage people to read the Afterlife Frequency. Also, with the holidays coming up, this is the gift to give somebody that you don't know what else to give them because they're coping with the loss of a loved one. The holidays are really, really tough after, Gary, you've lost a brother and your parents. The holidays are a painful reminder of who we've lost, what we don't have in our life. And that's one of the reasons that I've written the books that I do, to help people cope with loss. And that's why a lot of hospice organizations, grief counselors worldwide, and organizations like IANS, the International Association for Near-Death Studies, helping parents heal, the Near-Death Experience Research Foundation, to name a few, recommend my book, The Afterlife Frequency, for people who are coping with loss.
Aubrey Brown Club's on my hat, which is one of the things I do. And it's sorry, I apologize for that. But yeah, it was from a friends of mine who lost a child and to SIDS. And what they do is they turned it into, because they are also people of great faith. They've turned this into when a parent loses a child, they go in and help because you're so lost. And they do stuff like provide dinners. They help make arrangements. They take care of your still living children while you're going through this horrific situation. So AubreyBrownClub.org. If you are in that situation, they are Curtis and his lovely wife. Curtis Brown. So it's amazing, and that's what they do. When you get back into that, just to get it away, because that's the loss of a child is just heartbreaking for all of us. So,
oh my God, there's nothing worse.
When my mother passed unexpectedly a few months, but my brother had been sick, and I have 4 sisters.
Was I don't mean to interrupt, but was your brother having issues with his vascular system and his blood?
Yeah, he died of AIDS.
Okay, because when you're talking about him, I kept picking up blood in his vascular system, and that which was collapsing. So he's making an appearance, and he's making an appearance. Well, he's making a joke about angel wings, is there something about angel wings, like a little logo or a pin? And it's not like, oh, I've made my angel wings. He's making some type of joke about wings, like
His
angel wings
his
or some
son
logo
has
about
a
wings.
tattoo. He got a large tattoo because my brother was a pilot, and he got a large tattoo that it has wings on his
Wings.
head.
There we
So
go. So please let his son know that his dad came through and acknowledged the wings, the logo of the wings, and also he, what's with July?
July
Month of July.
was his birthday, and his birthday was on
Here
the
we go.
24th of July. So yeah.
Yeah. It's funny when all of a sudden a watermelon comes rolling up to me because I associate watermelons with summer, particularly July, 4th of July. Your brother rolled this big watermelon up to me, and I knew that that was the month of July. Because a lot of times people say, well, how do you get that? And these are some of the things that go on in my head. And I know that, we weren't planning, and
Yeah,
for all the
no, this is
listeners, this
yeah,
was completely
not about
unplanned. But yeah, but when Gary was talking about his brother, I kept getting blood. Now, of course, AIDS is a disease that you contract, through the blood. It's a blood-borne disease, and in most ways, before COVID, that was our last big pandemic. What was HIV? And the reason that it didn't spread even more widely because it was bloodborne as opposed to being airborne disease. And I'm not saying that one's better than the other, but he wants you to know. Okay. Of course he's fine, but he keeps saying, sorry, Charlie. Sorry, Charlie. Remember
yeah.
that old tuna?
Yeah,
Sorry, Charlie,
it's
the tuna. What is it with tuna
the
or
suicidal
eating
tuna.
tuna?
What it was. Charlie the tuna was a suicidal tuna who wanted to get caught and be turned into a can of tuna. Yeah.
Yeah, but your brother keeps saying sorry, Charlie. So there could be somebody named Chuck or Charles, or it could be some reference to we loved eating tuna or hated it, or something about tuna. But yeah, Charlie was the
Yeah, it's like it's
suicidal
bizarre.
tuna.
That's
But
so cool, and I will let his son know that that's fine because his son is would love to know it. So thank you. I appreciate that. That's always fun.
oh,
I did want to
mm.
I did want to ask you this because you brought up Tesla. Do you ever get famous people coming through? Do you get famous people coming through unannounced, or do you have to search for them?
Well, that is a very complex question. But I've done readings for people, and then all
Okay.
right, I'll tell you a
I
story.
just do that.
I was well. All right, I was on tour of upper state New York, and I was in Buffalo, and my manager was on the phone. She goes, "When? What?" And she goes, "Mark." She said, "Shirley MacLaine's assistant, the movie star, is on the phone, and Shirley wants to interview you for her radio show, Independent Expressions." And I said, "When?" She said, "Now." And I'm like, "What?" And so I get the phone, and the assistant says, "Stand by for Miss MacLaine." And then there's Shirley MacLaine on the phone. Now, Shirley MacLaine is an Academy Award winning actress. It was the first major celebrity to go public with beliefs in psychic phenomenon, reincarnation. She went public with that in the 80s and the 90s and onward. She was part of the Rat Pack with Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin. I mean, she's just had a career. She was on Downton Abbey, and she's in that series with Steve Martin
Murder in the
and
building.
Martin Short about the apartment.
Murder in the building.
The murder thing. Yeah. So I mean, she's pushing 90 and still working and amazing. And so all of a sudden, I'm on the phone with Shirley MacLaine. We're supposed to be on for 20 minutes. And at the end of 20 minutes, she said, "Mark, I'm enjoying this so much. Do you mind if we go longer?" And I said, "Well, it would be an honor." 2 hours and 40 minutes. And so during the course of the reading, we something about Stephen Hawking came up. And she said, Stephen was my friend. And I was in his office one time, and there were two pictures on the wall behind him, one of Albert Einstein and the other of Marilyn Monroe. And I said, well, and I go, okay, tell me more. And she said, Stephen, I understand Einstein, but why Marilyn? And then, all right, we are on air. Okay, Gary, we're on air, and she imitates him because her curves are more beautiful than a quantum singularity, she says, So I'm laughing. And then she said, I said, did you ever meet Marilyn? I had a feeling. And she goes, I did. She was my friend. I go, really? And she said that because something about Marilyn and then John F. Kennedy came up. And she goes, oh, him. And I said, what do you mean, oh, him? She said, well, I was there. The famous where Marilyn Monroe goes out and sings happy birthday to JFK. Well, the thing is, and Shirley explained, that the studios back then used to play the two of them off against each other. And she said it was really vicious what they did because we're always up for the same type of roles. And Marilyn threw a fit backstage and said she wasn't going to get into that slinky see-through dress. And one of the producers said, that's okay. Shirley MacLaine's here. She can fit into it. And so Marilyn said, fine, I'll do it. So she goes out and sings happy birthday and all this. And then Shirley said, then I got my big break after that. I was cast in the movie The Apartment. And The Apartment catapulted Shirley MacLaine's career. And she said, so there we are at Grumman's Chinese Theater, Hollywood, red carpet event for this movie. Marilyn shows up in a full-length fur coat. And it was hot that night. And everyone's like, what's up with Marilyn? She's wearing this fur coat. And so during the movie, Marilyn got up and went out to the bar. And Shirley went out there with her and said, Marilyn, is there a problem? And she said, Marilyn didn't say a word to me. She just turned and opened up her fur coat, and she was stark naked underneath it. And all right. And then Shirley MacLaine says, now that I think of it, Stephen Hawking had a point, about her curves. And so I'm laughing. And I said, well, I wonder what Marilyn would think of you saying that. And she goes, well, you're the medium. You tell me. All right. So, Gary, no pressure here at all. Here I am, a major movie star, but also a major icon in the metaphysical world. And I'm like, okay, calm down. I take a deep breath. And all of a sudden I start describing this beautiful woman coming through. And she goes, well, that sounds like Marilyn. And she said, did she kill herself? And the message was, no, I just couldn't take it anymore. She said, Shirley, I was jealous the way you could walk through a crowd with such grace and elegance, but I felt so garish and everyone's staring at me all the time. And then Marilyn said through me to Shirley, thank you for taking the high road and not doing it. And so I said that, and I didn't know what that meant. And Shirley goes, I know exactly what that means. And she goes, I've wondered about that my whole life. And I'm so glad to hear this. She said right after Marilyn died, she'd been working on a movie, and the studio came to me and said, well, we'll just cut the scenes with Marilyn out of it and refilm them with you. And Shirley said, no, I can't do that to my friend. I'm taking the high road. And so she got that confirmation. And then I said, there's somebody with her. I go, wow, this woman is so beautiful. Dark hair, and she's got the most beautiful violet eyes. And before I could say anything, and all of a sudden Shirley goes, Elizabeth Taylor. Liz, she was one of my, I know. And then it dawned on me, Gary, I'm on the phone doing a reading for Shirley MacLaine while I am communicating with Marilyn Monroe and Elizabeth Taylor.
That's a fantasy way to happen. I mean, I'm just throwing that out there.
I mean, it was such an honor. And the thing is, and Shirley was just so intelligent, so wonderful. I just look at that as one of the great honors of my life. And I've also come, and I could go on and on and on with famous people that I've done readings for. And there's another one I would like to touch on. But fame and fortune are only identifiers by spirits, because somebody was Marilyn Monroe or Elizabeth Taylor or whoever, that doesn't give them any special status on the other side. Okay. It's how we treat people, how we behave. And
before you tell that one story, can I get one thing in?
Yeah.
When you asked about Marilyn
sure.
and did she kill herself, and she said, "No, I just couldn't take it anymore."
No.
What is that?
Excuse me. I was wrong. Was Marilyn murdered? Was the question. I'm sorry. Was Marilyn murdered? Thank you. You're a good journalist. Thank you for catching that. Yeah, she said, no, I just couldn't take it anymore, because there is a thought that possibly the Kennedys had her killed or somebody else. And because, but Marilyn wasn't stupid. No, she said, no, I just couldn't take it anymore. I'm sorry. Because I've told the story, a couple times, and you're correct. She was not murdered. She took her own life, which is so sad because, Marilyn was always portrayed as the dumb blonde and all that. There was nothing stupid about that woman. She would not have gotten to where she was if she'd been an idiot. And, those were the roles. And also, I mean, think about it. This is 1950s, early 1960s. Women were treated very differently than how they should have been and how they are now. But that was so fascinating. And there was another time I was in Philadelphia, and I was on WURD, The Word. And I was invited by this African American station, and I was taking calls from listeners, and they were just amazing. I mean, it was just such a great interview, and I really enjoyed the host, and she was probably about 50, 52 years old. And after the show, she said, "Mark, would you mind doing a reading for me?" And I said, "Well, sure, I'd be happy to." And I connected with her, and I started describing this older gentleman, felt like your grandfather. And she said, "Yes, it sounds like my grandfather." And I was, explaining like how I felt that he passed. And then I said, "Wait a second." She goes, "What?" I go, "This is going to sound really weird, but there's somebody standing next to him." She goes, "Who is it?" I go, "I swear it looks like Gandhi." She goes, "Well, that isn't weird at all, considering he was very good friends with my father, who lived in India in the 1930s and studied nonviolence under Gandhi. And my grandfather was instrumental to the civil rights movement in the United States and helping Dr. Martin Luther King take Gandhi's nonviolent non-cooperation." And I'm like, I'm talking to Gandhi? I mean, I was. And the thing is, because your question earlier, well, do famous people just come and see you? But there was a real connection here. This was her grandfather, who was good friends with Gandhi, that he knew him since, in the 1930s when he lived in India. He lived with Gandhi, worked with Gandhi, marched against the British with Gandhi. But before her grandfather left, he of course said how much he loved her, and he said, "We will be here for you." 2 weeks later, I'm back home, and I got a call from one of the producers at WURD, and she was in tears. And I said, "What's going on?" And she told me that the host of the show had collapsed and died of a heart attack, just out of the blue, 52 years old. And I'll never forget, I putting down the phone, and Gary, I burst into tears. I'd only met her once, but she was just so awesome. And the fact that she honored me by letting me do a reading for her to connect, with her grandfather and with Mahatma Gandhi. But they also were letting her know that they were going to be there for her. And I've thought about that quite a bit. I wrote about that particular reading in my book, Evidence of Eternity, because once again, it wasn't the fame and fortune that distinguished these spirits. It was the good that they do. And so when you asked, have I connected with people who were famous and historical? The answer is yes.
How many? Because my time is rapidly because Mark's busy. So but I wanted to ask, how often do your contacts come through? How often does your family come through? Is this a daily thing? Do they get tired of talking to you? I mean, do they ever come up and just go, "Hey, what's happening? What's for dinner?" I mean, what?
Yeah, they do. We have to realize that we can't judge spirits by our physical limitations. All right, we're in corporeal, material form, and our vibrations very, very slow. All right, the electromagnetic soul, everything in the EM spectrum, electromagnetic spectrum, moves at the speed of light, 186,282 miles per second. And the time it took me to say that, your brother could have been back and forth to the moon about 8 times. All right. So they don't have to be hanging out with you all day, because by the time I'm pouring myself a cup of water, they're not going to wait around for that. So they can pop in and out. And they are also capable of multitasking in a way that we can't even understand it. So there are many times, maybe during the day or throughout the week, when I feel the presence of my loved ones in spirit. In fact, yesterday I was pondering on something, and I had reached like a complete block on what to do. Then all of a sudden I realized it was my parents, and they gave me the idea. And within a half hour, I knocked out something that I couldn't figure out to do in 2 weeks. So they will come, and it's not just me, it's everybody. And that's one of the things that I teach in my book, The Afterlife Frequency, is the raft technique, how to recognize the presence of spirits, accept the contact is real, feel it without overthinking it, and trust the message. And when you start implementing raft, and the book explains not only what raft is, but gives some exercises how to develop that, then you too will find out how your loved ones in spirit, they're not here to control you, but they can help guide you. And if you're having a big decision, they're going to give you input. But ultimately, Gary, the gift that the gift that God gives to us is free will. So while we are here in this world, we are the ones who make the decisions as to what it is we're going to do. And I think that's why all the great spiritual teachers, be it Zoroaster, Moses, Jesus, Buddha, Confucius, it all comes down to this: be nice.
Pray for wisdom. He gives it in abundance. That's
beautifully
that's
said.
What I go with. And hey, I feel like my brother's kind of falling behind. Your parents are like giving you stuff to create, and my brother's giving me bupkis. So
but don't block. Tell him you welcome his guidance. Okay?
I love the fact that, hey,
and he said, and take care of that thing with your foot. What's going on with your foot? You got something with a toe or a foot?
Too much. That are exactly.
Okay, you having some problems with like one of your toes, like your big toe? He's talking about your big toe, your foot.
But yeah, it's a big,
close enough. All right, but there's also something. Yeah. Well, it doesn't mean stop running. It may mean perhaps you need different types of shoes, maybe something that has more support.
I wish you running.
So there you go.
You know the best part about running? Stopping. That's the best part of it.
I walk. I'm a walker. I like to walk because it's very important. Cardiovascular exercise cannot be underestimated. And I saw a report the other day. It said that between the year 2022 and the year 1970, men in the United States are an average of 30 pounds heavier. And it's because of our sedentary lifestyles, social media, our computers. When I was a kid, my social network was outside. That's what my social. We used to go outside. We play. We go to the beach. We play softball, football, whatever. We do so. We'd ride bikes. Everything wasn't looking at a little tiny screen. And these technological devices are awesome, but they don't replace
Yeah,
get up and
absolutely.
move.
No, as we fight that good fight into the night, it's important. As we grow older, it's constant. So yeah, I'm right there with you. And I've got a 10 and a 12-year-old. This is the face of optimism right here. You have your kids that young at this age. This is optimistic. And so I've got every desire to see grandkids. So I'm
Yeah, well, let me tell you, with kids that age, you
absolutely.
definitely are getting
I am
cardio.
hanging in there. Well, this is episode 2. I can't wait till episode 3, Mark. I'm just
Well, thank you, Gary. I appreciate it. I
the
look forward
Afterlife
to it.
Frequency, Mark Anthony, the psychic lawyer, and as always, you're just fascinating. In the words of Jocelyn, he's the episode I didn't even know I needed. Thank you, my friend. Always just a joy.
Well, thank you.